All right, my good friends, I'm going to start off with a Disney trivia question. What movie are we watching right here? Okay, and the answer there you see is Bolt. That's how Will spent a little bit of tonight. So we're going to look at first. I'm going to just try to keep myself in order, kind of like I would do in class, kind of right on the board of what I want to get to. And then we're going to look at some documents here. So this is tonight's talking points. So my first talking point is great job on the DBQ. I can see adjustments and it seems to be clicking for a lot of us. Some of you guys I put point totals out of 10. Some of you guys I did not. I was just did that kind of randomly. But if you're curious of what you think you would have got, I usually spelled it out with what you would be getting points for. What I liked that I saw is that we tried to make made a really clear-cut difference from the first DBQ to this one. Like if there's something that you needed to change, it seemed like you changed it. And also, what I also like to see, even though it's not great, but you see mistakes, but easily correctable mistakes. And sometimes that's good to make a mistake because when it's identified, you can correct it a little bit easier. So I'm going to look at the DBQ rubric again. So this is, you have this as well in your AP exam folder. And I want to talk about something that I don't really recommend this unless you're having trouble getting to all 5 of the documents. So you're going to have 5 documents. There's not going to be a reading time. I mean, you could read for 40 minutes and start read as much as you can in 5 minutes. Not a good strategy, but you could. Whereas if you were sitting in a classroom, the teacher would say, okay, you cannot start writing, but you can mark on these documents for 15 minutes. When the 15-minute buzzer goes off, you can start writing your essay. So there's no break. So what I recommend within the 5 documents is you spend about 12 minutes or so on the document, which would give you 33 minutes to write a paper. And just another rule of thumb, you want to make sure that somewhere quiet in your house. You want to make sure the phone's not ringing. You're not tempted. Nobody's going to walk in and ask you a question, etc. So you want to make sure if it's like a laptop, it's plugged in. That's kind of like the nuts and bolts stuff. But you want to be, you want to be probably like 12 minutes, because if they give you 15 minutes for 7 docs, my Covcath math tells me that's a little bit over 2 minutes per doc. So if they're giving you 5, in between 10 and 12 minutes. And hopefully by that time 12 minutes is up, that you know what your thesis is going to be and you can write out your thesis. Context is going to be flooding back to your head right off the bat, and then you just have to know for your thesis you have to respond to the prompts. Okay, but if you are having trouble to read all the documents, figure out how you're going to use them all, there is a way to use only 2 documents and score really well. And it's something that you could try. You could see how it's going to work, and see if it's helpful. But I'll show you that in tonight's homework. And also a disclaimer here, this is my first time ever teaching AP, first time ever teaching this question, the DBQ question. I'm praying that this works for you and you guys do well. And I know some of you guys are going to work hard, and it might not end up in your favor because just stupid circumstances. But I'm praying this works hard. I wouldn't like. I have never graded the DBQ, but I've read about it and watched videos on how they grade them. So I'm trying to be what I think is accurate as possible. The last thing I want to do is give you false hope that you're going to ace it out of the park. So I usually, even if I think you did awesome, I usually try to say, make sure you stay focused and stay relaxed. And chances are the prompt could be something that you're not all that familiar with, but the documents will give you kind of the answers and the ideas to write about. So don't let a prompt throw you off right off the bat. But let's just look at this DBQ rubric, which you have, and it's a 10-point exam or 10-point question. So the context, I don't think I need to talk about context. You talk about it. use the time period from 1450, around 1450, prior to 1450, up to 1450. Just use like a chronological term or phrase like during, before, after, preceding, and then throw in the time period. Just do that so that the reader knows you're talking about your context there. Thesis. I don't need to talk much about thesis. I will show you a prompt here in a little bit. But the one thing here is response to the prompt with a historical defensible claim that establishes a line of reasoning. Chances are you're going to get a prompt that has more than one thing that you need to address, which I'll show you tonight. So make sure if it asks you to write about a land-based empire and a trade-based empire, make sure you talk about those two things in the thesis. Don't only focus on a trade-based empire. So that'll be a little bit more clear when we go over it. All right, so here's the big thing here. So if you get that, the first paragraph will give you 2 points. Most of us are doing a pretty good job of getting 2 points coming out of the first paragraph. All right, so here's how you can decide you're going to use 4 documents or you're going to just use just 2. All right, so you get 1 point here if you describe the content of at least 2 documents to address the topic of the prompt. So you describe why those documents are put in there. You didn't necessarily argue with them. You just described what the document was saying and how it relates to the prompt. Just simple description. All right, so if you do that just with 2 documents, just kind of describe 2 documents, you're going to get your 3rd point. Okay, here's how you get your 4th point. You support an argument in response to the prompt using at least 2 documents. So here's where you could stop at 2 documents, okay? If you wanted to do that, if you're freaking out about like you can't analyze 4 documents and write about them in the time period. If you support an argument in response to the prompt using at least 2 documents, and hopefully I've been a little bit clear on that, and I've showed you how you do that. I've typed it in a lot of your guys' essays. It's I say to argue with a document, what you should do is you should describe the document, and then you should say, therefore, comma, this supports the whatever your thesis claim is. So the one you just wrote about, I'll just use the one where they were talking, a mestiza talking about how this Christian symbol was actually an indigenous religious symbol before it was a Christian symbol. And so I would describe that, and then I would say, therefore, comma, you see that the Spaniards wanted to completely eradicate all past religions. So you see that I argued my thesis claim was going to be that the Spaniards destroyed the Native American culture. Okay, so by adding that one sentence, therefore, comma, the Spaniards wanted to eradicate all previous religions, that argues for my thesis. It's not just a description. A description just tells you what that piece was about. But to argue with it, if you include that therefore, and one of our students did every document, she had a therefore comma, and then it tied back to her thesis. It was perfect. She would get 2 points because she used 4 documents. But say you're freaking out. You just only want to use 2 documents. Okay, let's just count it up here. You did a good job on your context with your notes. You know how to write a thesis statement. You respond to all the prompt. You got 2 points in the first paragraph. You want to describe 2 documents. Okay, you describe 2 documents. Now you got 3 points. Now you want to take the same 2 documents that you talked about before, and in the paragraph that you talk about each document, you end that paragraph with a therefore comma, and then relate it to your thesis statement. So at that point, you'd have 1, 2, 3, and 4 points at that point. Now, if you did it for 4 documents, if you went on and described 2 more documents, and then you just described how they supported your argument, 4 times, like had a therefore comma 4 times, you would get another point. So at that point, you would be at 5 points. So let me just pause this here so I do not run out of battery here. Okay, so we're back in action here. So let me go back to this. Okay, so I was right about here. So what I was saying is you can use 2 documents or you can use 4 documents. I would say only use the 2 document method if you are really struggling with the length of the documents, or maybe it's only 2 of the 5 would click with you, maybe. So that's a possibility itself. Now, I don't think that's necessarily a bad technique to use, um, because it can be effective. The one thing it does, though, if you're only going to talk about 2 documents, if you screw up arguing with the document one time, like if you think like your therefore sentence works for both 2 documents, and it ends up being, if the reader thinks that you didn't make a strong enough argument with one of the docs, then you totally lose that point. Whereas if you are describing 4 documents, and then after the description, each paragraph you have a therefore comma, and then you argue with each document, say you do that all 4 times, but only 2 of the times your reader thinks you did it correctly, and 2 out of the 4 times you did it correct, and the other 2 you did incorrect, you're still going to get a point. So if you go 50% for arguing with 4 of the documents, you still get 1 point. If you go 50% with arguing with 2 of the documents, you don't get any points. So that's a little bit of the risk that you take there. But if you're crunched on time, if you're not the fastest reader, that could be a little bit of an option for you to only use 2 documents. So it is possible, 2 out of 5, so we're only talking 40% of the documents. So let's just count it up again. So 1 up here is context, 2 for thesis, 2 for describing 2 documents, or 1 here. So we're at 3. Now we're at 4, okay? And we'll just skip the hipping for a second and say with those 2 documents, you add in 2 pieces of outside evidence. Now you're at 6 points if you brought in something that was outside of the prompt. So it's got to be your outside evidence has to support your thesis statement. You can't just say like, also Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492. You'd have to argue why that was relevant to the prompt, and make sure. And if you're using this 2 doc method, you want to like read all the docs itself, because you don't want to put in outside evidence that they actually talked about beforehand. So one thing I'm creating is I'm creating a spice chart for every unit. You might have seen them. I've done one for land-based empires. I'm working on one for the unit 4. At the bottom of those spice charts, there's going to be a whole bunch of dates. So let's see if I can bring this up for you. Just see here. Okay, so yeah, I actually made this at like 4 o'clock in the morning the other day because I couldn't sleep. But so I'm giving you guys spice charts for each unit. It's a good thing to have. And this whole precursor to the spice chart is all context of what is going on in that time period. And I just haven't done this. I was thinking about making it a homework assignment where like each row does one of these countries, and I might do that next week. But at the bottom here, I'm giving you, we did this in class here, but I've given you about 30 dates here. Now, not all of them apply to the Americas, but 1492, the Columbian Exchange begins, his first voyage. They talked about both of those, so you wouldn't want to be talking about the Columbian Exchange. But you could talk about, I don't know if the Farmar map would help you, but Montezuma was killed in Tenochtitlan. This was the Aztec ruler. He was killed by Cortez's forces. So you could definitely use that date, talking about how the Spaniards took a monarch of the Aztecs, and instead of like negotiating with him, they just ended up imprisoning him, and he is eventually killed. That's an outside fact. Atahualpa begins his reign in the Incan Empire. In 1532, Pizarro conquered the Incas. Another example of just totally getting rid of their culture. So once you figure out what unit they might be talking about, you have all these spice charts, you'll have all these dates too. So that's good. But you need to argue with the outside evidence. Okay, you don't just throw in a fact. You need to argue with them. I saw one teacher do this. I don't know if it's necessarily the best method, but I don't think it's a bad method. Their last paragraph was their outside evidence, and what they said was, in addition to all of this evidence presented, there are several other reasons why the Americans were destroyed by the Spaniards. And then they listed other things that were outside the documents that helped them. So they dedicated one paragraph to outside evidence. So that was something that was helpful. And your outside evidence cannot come from, it cannot be put in the context statement. You cannot use it in the context. You can't double dip there. And your outside evidence has to be around this time period. So you can't say 500 years after this, or like a present day fact wouldn't get you points. All right, so back to my using the 2-doc method. Now, if you do that, just skipping the hip part, now you're at 6 points. Okay, probably going to get college credit for 6 points. A lot of teachers say. I wouldn't swear by that, but a lot of people say 5 to 6 is going to be a 3 on the AP test. So now you're at 6, and you still can get 2 more points by hipping. You get, for each doc up to 2, you get 2 points per doc for hipping. And since you've already chosen your 2 docs, maybe that it's easier to hip those because you're only focusing in on the one doc. So what some teachers say says talk about all 4 docs, hip all 4 docs, and some of you guys actually do that. And the reason they say that is because then you can screw up twice out of 4. If you hit 4 documents and you screw up twice out of 4, then you're still going to get 2 full points. But say that you only chose 2 docs and you hipped them correctly both times, you had 2 points of outside evidence. There's a possibility, if you did it correctly, and then if you're a good writer and efficient, you could get an 8 out of 10 by only talking about 2 docs. I'm not saying that is something I would recommend, because it takes away a lot of your leeway as far as making mistakes are concerned. But it is definitely possible, and it might make it a little bit more manageable for you if you're struggling with this whole big idea of a DBQ. DBQs are tough. I mean, the average out of 7 last year was a 2 out of 7. So the nation doesn't do good on DBQs. So we were saying we wanted you to be somewhere like maybe a 4 out of 7. Now we're asking you to be probably about a 6 out of 10. But I think they made the rubric a little bit easier. Now this down here, like what the heck is a complexity point? It is a waste of time for any teacher, really, what they tell me, from the experts tell me, to even teach complexity. You just see it when you see it. You know it when you know it. It's a complex argument. There's nothing to teach about complexity. If hopefully that makes sense. Like, don't worry about it. Like, basically, you want to get, a 6 out of 9, and don't even really focus on this. But if you get a complexity point, that would be beast mode. Don't I'd have to read all the essays to see what if I think you would get it or not. But it's just don't really worry about it. It's not going to make or break you. Also, another thing I would say is don't really worry about if you still have time, you want to tie everything together. If you want to restate your thesis, that's good. What I would do probably, instead of like saying some generic statement in your thesis, like saying this because of this it has made the world what it is today, or the world wouldn't have been the same, blah blah blah. That's nothing. So don't even write that. Like, just go back and proofread. So don't say the world wouldn't be the way it is if it wasn't for this. Okay, that's not going to get you points. You don't need it. So instead of a generic conclusion that might help you in English class, just go back and reread your stuff. Another good thing to know about the AP exam, which I've said a few times, is that there is no points taken off for incorrect statements. So if you freak out that you might have said, like, used the wrong date or something, you're not going to get anything taken off. You could write it majorly incorrect, historically factual essay, but as long as you follow the rules, you would still get college credit. All right, so that is what I've done here. So great job on your rubric, on your DBQ, your rubric, using only 2 docs. Showed you some resources we have. I'm including some more of those. You now have a Unit 4 cheat sheet, which looks something like this. It's basically what the Unit 4 cheat sheet. This is actually a Unit 5 cheat sheet, but it's basically what it is it takes these slideshows. I didn't make this, by the way. It takes the slideshows that you have, and it breaks them down to like 5 or 6 pages instead of a slideshow, because you can kind of access the material a little bit easier. So all these cheat sheets, they're called either cheat sheets or reference sheets. They're really good reads, and they are great examples of where you can find outside evidence and context. Okay, so that's just in our resources. Let's see. Okay, as far as finishing up Unit 4, that's on you. Just you need to go read those slideshows again, look at the DBQs again that I've sent you. But we're moving into Unit 5. I said I've created a spice chart, included some cheat sheets. Same thing, I already told you that. All right, so let's look at a DBQ and talk about how we would use it. Okay, so I will give you this DBQ to open. I'll attach it to the instructions. All right, so this is a DBQ. This is a modified DBQ. Okay, your task. Okay, all this is just going to be blah, blah, blah. You know what the instructions are just going to tell you what you need to write. Basically, the instructions are the rubric, so really your eye should divert to what the prompt is. In this case, they call it the task. Using the documents, evaluate the extent to which European colonization of the Americas had an impact on Native American and African cultures in the period from 1500 to 1800. Okay, so now I'm going to write a thesis, and you're going to tell me if it is correct. Okay, this thesis is incorrect because it is a great thesis. I followed it correctly, did the although, x plus y, therefore c, etc. So I did all that, but the one thing I didn't say is I didn't include Africa. So you need to talk about everything they give you. So If I just say that they destroyed the Native American culture and I don't say anything about the African culture, I'm not going to get the point because I didn't answer the prompt. Also, it's going to be a little bit harder if you don't write a good thesis. It's hard for you to argue with the document, so that's a big problem for you. Okay, so now what I'm going to give you here is 11 minutes to, you're just going to have to time yourself, I guess. So see if you can time yourself and read these documents in about 10 to 11 minutes. So I will just stop it and then we'll pick it back up. And basically you guys need to set your timer. Okay, let's look at these bad boys. So hopefully you took the time. Hopefully you've were honest and saw how long it would take you to read those. If I can ever bring this back up, it is right here. So let's just look at like the 2-doc method. So there's 5 docs and they're actually kind of lengthy, and what is missing here is that there's no image or chart. So it's just 5 text documents. So that is there's going to be 4 text documents and some type of chart. This is made by a teacher. So a lot of teachers, what they're doing is they're modifying old past DBQs and then like just making them 5 DBQs and 5 document DBQs instead of 7. So let's just look at 2 documents. And I decided to look at like I'm familiar with, and you might, this should ring a bell after you read more about Unit 4, but King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, they are the Spanish kings. If you didn't know this, this is who Christopher Columbus, and they funded Christopher Columbus's journey. They're also, I mean, just so historical. Their daughter was Catherine of Aragon, who was married to Henry VIII, his first wife. So what they're saying, this is kind of interesting here. You see that they actually, although they're very Catholic monarchs, they want everybody to be Christians, and we know that the church kind of forced a lot of people. They want they go pretty easy on the Indians, it sounds like, in this document. And then you see, like, therefore, they use that word there. So that's like their purpose of writing the document. So you can easily hit this argument. An argument you can make is that they're living at like across the Atlantic from this new world, and what was going on is that the leaders of these European nations, they were out of sight, out of mind, and they would put these people in charge, sometimes called viceroys, of these colonies, and they could do whatever the heck they wanted to do over here because the king and queen were so far away. And the king and queen are so much kind of out of touch with what's really going on. Like they want the Spaniards to show these Indians how great Catholicism is, and they'll easily just become, and then they expect that the Spaniards are going to be very nice to them, just as if they were dealing with any other of their own countrymen back in Spain. So they're pretty naive because they're not in the trenches. So that they're, if you just ship that, the historical point of view is that Christopher Columbus had sailed over there in 1492, and we know that the church is very involved in the New World because of the Treaty of Tordesillas, which divided the New World up between the Catholic nations of Portugal and Spain. And so that's the historical context. The intended audience, they're writing this to the governor of Hispaniola. So it's basically of the island discovered by Columbus, which is today Haiti and Dominican Republic. And so this is a Spanish official they're writing to. The point of view of Ferdinand and Isabella is that they feel that Catholicism is the best thing ever, and that you can easily convert people to Catholicism by just telling them what it's about. And their purpose is that they want to get as many converts as possible. But they're a little bit naive in thinking that it's just going to go pretty smoothly. And they kept saying, treat these Indians well. A good piece of outside evidence for this one, she could say, although their intentions were to be nice, we know that Hernan Cortez conquered the Aztecs very forcibly and killed Montezuma. We know Christopher Columbus was imprisoned because the island of Hispaniola was governed horribly, and there was revolts, and the natives were hung, etc. So a lot of outside evidence there, but easy one to hip there. So if you say, I just want to talk about two docs, what's another easy one? And then my eyes kind of divert me to a smaller one. Now, Nzinga Memba, he's also known as he is King Alfonso, which we talked about and you read about in your units. So King Alfonso was the ruler in the Congo who converted to Christianity, and he took the name from Nzinga Memba. He takes it to King Alfonso, and he is writing to the King of Portugal. So two kings conversing here. It says, Sir, many of our people keenly desirous of the wars and things of your kingdom, wares or the things of your kingdom, which are brought here by your people. In order to satisfy their voracious appetite, seize many of our people freed and exempt men, and they kidnap even nobles and sons of nobles and our relatives, and take them to be sold to the whites who are in our kingdom. Sir, is the corruption and licentiousness that our country is being completely depopulated, and your highness should not agree with this nor accept it in as your service. This is why we beg of your highness to help us and assist us in this matter. So a little bit of outside, a little bit of context to this is that Nzinga Memba has made a deal with the Portuguese, that the Portuguese can come in and basically kind of like the Aztecs, the Portuguese can kidnap some of the Congos, some of Nzinga Memba's, their enemies. But they start running out of Nzinga Memba's enemies, and this is a line right here. They were kind of told, the Portuguese were told that they could only kidnap, lesser people. But now the Congo's nobles are being kidnapped, and that's like sends alarm bells off. Okay, so that's what's going on, is that both kings are knee deep in the slave trade in 1526. Outside evidence, sugar is known now that you can grow sugar in the Americas, and it is also known that the Great Dying has killed off the natives, and the natives cannot farm there anymore because they're either running away or they're dying. So they need these slaves because the Europeans don't want to do the work. Okay, so those are two easy ones to talk about, to tie to a thesis. And also what this does, this one's about Africa. The one previously was about the Americas. So you see that you can do it with just two documents. Now, if I just hit this real quick, I already told you the historical content. The intended audience was a king. So this was a king of the Congo writing to the European king of Portugal. The point of view is that the white Europeans are now doing despicable things, not because they're involved in the slave trade, but because they're kidnapping even the nobles and sons of nobles. And the purpose, his main purpose, is he wants this act of kidnapping nobles to stop immediately. And I always talk about in my regular AP class or regular class when we get to this point that I always think that the King of Portugal probably just laughed at this, if this letter even made it to the King of Portugal, because they just exploited. This king had made a deal with the devil, and he now has to lie in the bed that he made. So good DBQ. You could pick some other ones to write about here, but just want to show you that here and how you can take 2 out of 5 documents and be successful. As we get back to my talking points, I'm just about done here for tonight, and I'm going to watch a little news here after I put it onto a head puzzle. All right, so you should, also you can, I'll put in more 5 document DBQs. You can Google world history DBQs, and you want to be reading fast and kind of figuring out how you're going to do this under a time crunch. Okay, Friday, I'm going to post the Unit 5 review slides. So as you finish up Unit 4, you can now move on to Unit 5. So just review that. We're going to do the same thing on Friday. I'm going to give you a DBQ. I'll probably make it due on Tuesday. That's a little bit easier on you and me because people send them back, more wide range of time. So it's easy for me to get them back to you quickly. So we'll be writing a DBQ on Friday about Unit 5. But last piece of evidence, and maybe I'll just type this, okay? So the only thing you have to do is do this puzzle, and I will catch you on the flip side. Keep working hard.